The October wind cut through the Montana plains like a blade, carrying with it the scent of hay and distant snow from the Beartooth Mountains. In the small ranch house 15 miles outside Billings, Alan Rowe sat at the kitchen table, methodically wrapping his left wrist with white athletic tape. The same ritual he'd performed for 23 years, every time before climbing onto the back of a 2,000-pound bull. His calloused fingers moved with practiced precision, each wrapped tight enough to provide support, but loose enough to maintain circulation. At 42, Alan's hands told the story of his career: scars from rope burns, a crooked pinky finger that had been broken 3 times, and knuckles that ached on cold mornings like this one. "Dad, you're gonna be late," called out his 17-year-old daughter Sarah from the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing her Billings West High School volleyball uniform. The sight of her in that yellow and blue jersey always made Alan's chest tighten with pride. "Nah, sweetheart. Still got plenty of time," Alan replied, not looking up from his wrist. The Metropark Arena was only 20 minutes away, and the PBR Touring Pro event wouldn't start until 7 that evening. But Sarah knew her father well enough to recognize the nervous energy that came before every ride. Linda Rowe emerged from the bedroom, carrying a thermos of coffee in Alan's gear bag. At 39, she still moved with the grace that had caught Alan's attention when they first met at the Crow Fair Rodeo 20 years ago. Her auburn hair was streaked with premature gray, a badge of honor earned from 2 decades of watching the man she loved risk his life 8 seconds at a time. "Coffee's black, just how you like it," Linda said, setting the thermos beside Alan's elbow. She kissed the top of his head, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo mixed with leather and the slight staleness that seemed to cling to all rodeo cowboys. "Thanks, darlinda." Alan finished wrapping his wrist and flexed his fingers, testing the tape's tightness. "Sarah, you got a game tonight?" "Conference championship. 7:30. Sarah grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl and took a bite. "You'll miss it." The words hung in the air between them. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. In 23 years of bull riding, Alan had missed countless school events, birthdays, and family dinners. The PBR tour waited for no one, and the prize money that put food on their table and paid for Sarah's college fund came from those 8-second rides. "I'll make the next one, I promise," Alan said, though they all knew that promises in the rodeo world were as fragile as the bones that got broken pursuing them. Linda placed her hand on Alan's shoulder. "Win or lose tonight, just come home in one piece. That's all I ask." Alan looked up at his wife, seeing the worry lines that had deepened around her eyes over the years. Every time he climbed over the rails of a bucking chute, Linda held her breath until he either made the whistle or hit the dirt. Tonight would be no different. "Always do," Alan said, covering her hand with his. But they both knew that in bull riding, always was a word that could be broken by 8 seconds of chaos. The kitchen fell into comfortable silence, filled only by the ticking of the wall clock shaped like a horse's head, a gift from Alan's first sponsor back in 1999. Through the window, Alan could see their neighbors' cattle grazing in the distance, black dots against the golden grass that stretched toward the mountains. Montana had been good to the Rowe family. Alan had grown up in Texas, following the rodeo circuit with his father until a heart attack took the old man when Alan was 25. That's when he and Linda had decided to settle down by the small ranch outside Billings and try to give their daughter the stability that Alan had never known as a child. The ranch was modest, 40 acres, a small house, and a barn that needed new shingles every few years. But it was theirs, paid for with prize money and endorsement deals that had dwindled as Alan aged out of his prime. These days, he competed mostly on the PBR Touring Pro circuit, a step below the elite-built Ford Tough Series where the young guns earned the big money and television coverage. "Dad, why don't you just quit?" Sarah asked suddenly, voicing the question that had lingered unspoken in the house for months. "You could get a job with Tom Henderson at the feed store. He's always saying he needs good help." Alan smiled at his daughter's practical nature. She had inherited her mother's common sense along with her blonde hair. "Because this is what I do, sweetheart. This is who I am." "But you're not 20 anymore," Sarah continued. "Jake Martinez retired last year, and he was younger than you." Jake Martinez had been Alan's traveling partner for 5 years, sharing motel rooms and splitting gas money as they crisscrossed the western states chasing points and prize money. His retirement had hit Alan harder than he'd admitted to anyone, even Linda. Suddenly, Alan was the old man in the locker room, the veteran whose best years were clearly behind him. "Sarah, your father knows what he's doing," Linda said gently, though Alan could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The truth was, Alan had been asking himself the same question Sarah posed. His body ached in ways it never had before. Recovery time between events had stretched from days to weeks. The young riders coming up through the ranks were stronger, faster, and hungrier than Alan remembered being even in his prime. But quitting meant admitting that the thing that had defined him for over 2 decades was over. It meant accepting that his best days were behind him, that he would spend the rest of his life as an ex-bull rider rather than a bull rider. That transition terrified him more than any bull he'd ever faced. "Tonight's bull is Widowmaker," Alan said, changing the subject. "Heard he's been on a tear this season. Bucked off 12 riders in a row." Linda's face tightened. She knew the names of the most dangerous bulls on the circuit the way other wives knew the names of their husbands' co-workers. Widowmaker was a black Brahma cross, 1,950 pounds of muscle and attitude, known for his sudden direction changes and his tendency to come back at riders after they hit the ground. "Maybe you should pass on that one," Linda said carefully. "Take an easier draw." "Can't do that, darlin'. You know how it works." Alan stood up and stretched, his lower back popping in 3 places. "Besides, I've ridden meaner bulls than Widowmaker. Remember Hell's Bells down in Amarillo? That son of a gun nearly put me in orbit, but I stayed on." That had been 8 years ago, when Alan was still competing regularly on the premier circuit. He'd scored an 89 on Hell's Bells, one of the highest scores of his career. But 8 years in bull riding might as well be a lifetime. "I remember the hospital bills," Linda said dryly. Alan kissed his wife on the forehead and ruffled Sarah's hair. "Y'all worry too much. I'm gonna go load up the truck." Outside, the Montana sky stretched endlessly in all directions, painted in shades of blue and white that reminded Alan why he'd fallen in love with big sky country. He loaded his gear bag into the bed of his Ford F-250, the same truck he'd been driving for 12 years. The tailgate was covered with stickers from rodeos across the western states: Cheyenne, Calgary, Houston, Las Vegas. His riding gear was laid out in the bag with military precision. His lucky chaps made from brown leather that had softened with age, his black riding vest with protective padding, and his helmet that bore the scars of too many impacts with arena dirt. At the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a towel, was his bull rope, 8 feet of braided grass rope with a leather-wrapped handle that had been molded by thousands of rides. Alan's phone buzzed with a text message from his traveling partner, Casey Thompson, a 24-year-old from Wyoming who reminded Alan of himself at that age. All confidence and hunger, convinced that the next ride would be the one that changed everything. Headed to the arena early. "Want to get a look at the bulls before the riders' meeting." Alan typed back quickly. "Be there in an hour. How's your shoulder?" Casey had separated his shoulder 3 weeks ago in Rapid City, but he was riding tonight anyway. That was the bull rider's code. You rode unless you physically couldn't, and sometimes you rode even then. "Good enough," came Casey's reply, which Alan interpreted as "still hurts like hell, but I'm not missing a paycheck." Alan climbed into the truck and sat for a moment, looking back at the house where his family was getting on with their Thursday evening routine. Sarah would drive herself to volleyball practice, then Linda would pick her up after the game. They would go to dinner at the Cracker Barrel off Interstate 90, where Sarah would order chicken tenders and Linda would get the meatloaf. By the time Alan got home tonight, they would both be asleep. This routine had played out hundreds of times over the years, with only the details changing. The restaurants where Linda and Sarah ate dinner, the sports that Sarah played, the bulls that Alan drew. But the essential pattern remained the same. Alan left to chase 8 seconds of glory while his family lived their lives around his absence. He started the truck and backed out of the driveway, waving at Linda, who was watching from the kitchen window. As he drove toward Billings, the Yellowstone River wound alongside the highway, its waters running low after a dry summer. The cottonwoods that lined the riverbank had turned gold with the season, and Alan rolled down his window to breathe in the crisp October air. 23 years ago, when he first started riding bulls professionally, Alan had dreamed of world championships and million-dollar paydays. He had pictured himself on television, his name announced to crowds of 50,000 people. But rodeo was a hard business that rewarded only the very best with fame and fortune. The rest, riders like Alan, made a living grinding out small-town events and regional tours, accumulating enough prize money to pay the bills and keep chasing the dream. The Metropark Arena appeared ahead, its parking lot already filling with pickup trucks and horse trailers. Alan had competed here dozens of times over the years, and the familiar sight of the red brick buildings and the grandstands made his pulse quicken with anticipation. Tonight, he would face Widowmaker in front of a crowd of 3,000 people. 8 seconds to prove he still belonged in the arena. 8 seconds to justify another month on the road. Another round of worried looks from Linda. Another missed volleyball game. Alan parked near the competitor's entrance and grabbed his gear bag from the truck bed. The October wind had picked up, carrying with it the sounds of bulls snorting in the holding pens behind the arena. Somewhere in those pens, Widowmaker was waiting. The Metropark arena buzzed with pre-event energy as Alan walked through the competitor's entrance. The familiar sounds of rodeo preparation surrounded him, bulls moving restlessly in their pens, the metallic clang of chute gates being tested, and the low murmur of cowboys discussing their draws and strategy. The smell of hay, livestock, and leather mixed with the aroma of barbecue and funnel cakes from the concession stands. Casey Thompson was already in the locker room, sitting on a wooden bench and working rosin into his bull rope. At 24, Casey still had the lean build and easy confidence of youth. His blonde hair was cut short, and his green eyes held the fearless gleam that Alan remembered from his own early years on the circuit. "About time you showed up, old man," Casey said with a grin. "I was starting to think you might have come to your senses and stayed home." "Not today, kid," Alan replied, setting his gear bag on the bench next to Casey. "How's the shoulder feeling?" Casey rotated his left shoulder experimentally, wincing slightly. "Like it's been run over by a freight train, but it'll hold together for 8 seconds." The locker room gradually filled with the other riders competing that night. Alan knew most of them by reputation if not personally. The PBR Touring Pro Circuit was small enough that familiar faces appeared at most events. There was Miguel Santos from New Mexico, a compact rider with reflexes like a cat. Tyler Webb, a lanky kid from Oklahoma who rode bulls the way others rode horses, with an almost supernatural sense of balance. And Bobby Hutchins, a 35-year-old veteran from Colorado who, like Alan, was fighting to prove he still belonged in professional bull riding. "Gentlemen," called out Chuck Morrison, the tour director, as he entered the locker room. Chuck was a former bull rider himself, forced into retirement by a back injury that had required 3 surgeries. His weathered face and slight limp served as a reminder to all the active riders of what the sport could take from a man. "Riders meeting in 5 minutes. Then we'll do the draw." The draw was the moment that would determine each rider's fate for the evening. 40 bulls, 40 riders, and the computer system that randomly paired them together. A rider might draw a bull that was relatively easy, increasing his chances of a successful ride and prize money. Or he might draw a rank bull, one of the ornery, athletic animals that made their living by launching cowboys into the arena dirt. Alan had already been told he would face Widowmaker, but the formal draw would make it official. He'd spent the afternoon studying video of the bull on his phone, watching how Widowmaker moved where he tended to kick and how quickly he could change direction. Every bull had patterns, tendencies that a smart rider could exploit. The key was staying on long enough to figure out those patterns. "How many times you faced Widowmaker?" Casey asked as they walked toward the meeting room. "Never," Alan admitted. "But I've seen plenty of film. He's strong and athletic, likes to come out of the chute turning left, then spin back to the right. The trick is not to get ahead of him. Heard he's mean, too. Comes after riders when they hit the ground." "Most of the good ones do," Alan said. "That's what makes them good." The riders' meeting was held in a small conference room adjacent to the arena. Chuck Morrison stood at the front, holding a clipboard with the evening's lineup. Behind him, a whiteboard listed the bulls and their recent statistics, outs, scores, and buck-off rates. "All right, boys, you know the drill," Chuck began. 8-second rides, judges scoring from 0 to 50 on each bull. Bull scores and rider scores combined for your total. Highest score wins the long round, top 15 riders come back for the short round. Alan listened with half his attention, having heard the same speech hundreds of times before. His eyes drifted to the whiteboard, where Widowmaker's statistics were listed in black marker. In his last 10 outs, the bull had bucked off every rider. His average bull score was 44 points, high enough to give a good rider a chance at an 85-point ride if everything went perfectly. "Draw time," Chuck announced, pulling out a tablet computer. "Casey Thompson, you've got Thunder Road." Casey nodded, satisfied. Thunder Road was a solid bull, athletic but not particularly dangerous. A good bull for a rider nursing a shoulder injury. "Miguel Santos, you're on Devil's Backbone." The draw continued alphabetically. Alan's name was near the end, giving him time to think about what was coming. In a few hours, he would climb over the rails of chute number 4, settle onto Widowmaker's back, and wrap his hand in the bull rope. Then the chute gate would open, and 1,950 pounds of angry bull would try to remove him from the earth. "Alan Rowe," Chuck called out. "You've got Widowmaker." "There it is," Casey whispered. Several riders turned to look at Alan, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. Drawing a bull like Widowmaker was both a curse and an opportunity. The bull was dangerous enough to hurt a rider badly, but athletic enough to provide a high score if ridden successfully. "Bobby Hutchins, you're on Tornado Alley." The meeting broke up, and riders began their individual preparations. Some went to study video of their bulls, others warmed up with stretching or light exercise. Alan preferred to find a quiet corner and mentally rehearse his ride, visualizing every possible scenario. He found a spot in the empty stands and pulled out his phone to watch more footage of Widowmaker. The bull was impressive to watch, powerful hindquarters that could launch him 6 feet in the air, a massive neck and shoulders that whipped riders around like rag dolls. But Alan also noticed something else in the video. Widowmaker's front legs were slightly shorter than his back legs, giving him a distinctive style of bucking that rolled forward rather than straight up and down. "Studying for your final exam?" asked a familiar voice. Alan looked up to see Linda approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She had changed from her work clothes into jeans and a red Western shirt that Alan had bought her for their 15th anniversary. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup except for the lipstick she always applied before watching Alan ride. "Thought you were going to Sarah's game," Alan said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Game doesn't start for another hour. Figured I'd stop by and see how you're doing." Linda sat down beside him on the metal bleacher. "Plus, I wanted to get a look at this Widowmaker everyone's talking about." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the crew prepare the arena below. Workers were adding fresh dirt to the riding area, raking it smooth and removing any debris that might trip up a bull or rider. The chutes were being inspected one final time, their mechanisms tested and retested to ensure they would open cleanly when needed. "You don't have to watch tonight," Alan said softly. "I know how hard it is for you." Linda smiled and took his hand. "Alan Rowe, I've been watching you ride bulls for 20 years. I'm not going to stop now, especially not when you need me most." "What makes you think I need you most tonight?" "Because you're scared," Linda said simply. "More scared than I've seen you in years. And when you're scared, that's when you need to know someone believes in you." Alan wanted to deny it, to maintain the facade of confidence that bull riders wore like armor. But Linda knew him too well. She had seen him through broken bones, concussions, and the slow realization that his best years were behind him. If anyone had earned the right to see past his pretenses, it was her. "What if I can't do it anymore?" Alan asked, voicing the fear that had been growing inside him for months. "What if tonight is the night I finally meet the bull I can't handle?" "Then you'll have tried your best, and that's all anyone can ask," Linda replied. "But Alan, you've been riding bulls since before I met you. It's not just what you do, it's who you are. Trust that." A commotion near the bullpens caught their attention. Several cowboys had gathered around one of the holding areas, pointing and talking in low voices. Alan and Linda walked over to see what had drawn their interest. In pen number 14, Widowmaker stood alone. The bull was even more impressive in person than in video. A massive black animal with white markings on his face and a set of horns that curved slightly forward. His muscles rippled under his hide as he moved, and his eyes held an intelligence that made Alan's stomach tighten. "That's a lot of bull," Linda said quietly. "Yeah, it is," Alan agreed. Widowmaker was the kind of animal that made other bulls look small by comparison. His sheer size was intimidating, but it was the way he carried himself that marked him as special. There was an alertness to his posture, a readiness that suggested he knew exactly what was coming and was eager for the challenge. "How many riders has he bucked off this season?" Linda asked. "All of them," replied Bobby Hutchins, who had walked up beside them. 12 straight outs, 12 cowboys eating dirt. Word is he's getting smarter, too. Learning what works and what doesn't." "Bulls don't learn," Linda said skeptically. "Ma'am, with respect, the good ones do," Bobby replied. "They remember which moves work best, which riders they can intimidate, and which ones they need to work harder to get off. Widowmaker's one of the smart ones." Alan studied the bull for several more minutes, noting how he moved, how he held his head, and how he reacted to the people around his pen. Widowmaker seemed calm but alert, like a professional athlete preparing for competition. That worried Alan more than if the bull had been agitated or angry. An angry bull was predictable. A calculating bull was dangerous. "I should go get ready," Alan said finally. Linda kissed him on the cheek. "I'll be watching from section 12, row 5. Same spot as always." "Same spot as always," Alan confirmed. It had become their tradition over the years. Linda always sat in the same section, wearing something red, so Alan could find her in the crowd before his ride. Back in the locker room, Alan began the ritual of getting dressed for his ride. First came the protective vest, a piece of equipment that hadn't existed when he started riding, but was now mandatory on the professional circuits. The vest was designed to protect his ribs and internal organs from direct impacts, though it did nothing to prevent broken bones or concussions. Next came his chaps, leather leg coverings that protected his legs from the bull's hide and from the arena dirt when he inevitably hit the ground. Alan's chaps were brown leather that had darkened with age and sweat, custom-made by a leather worker in Fort Worth who had been outfitting cowboys for 30 years. His boots came next, traditional cowboy boots with underslung heels that would help him maintain his grip in the stirrups if he were riding a horse, but were purely traditional when riding bulls. The boots were black leather, polished to a shine that reflected the locker room's fluorescent lights. Finally, Alan pulled on his riding glove, a leather glove that would give him a better grip on the bull rope. He flexed his fingers, testing the fit and feeling the familiar tightness that would help him maintain control during the chaos of the ride. Casey was going through his own preparation ritual nearby, stretching his shoulders and working rosin into his rope. The rosin would make the rope tacky, improving his grip and potentially adding precious milliseconds to his ride time. "You ready for this?" Casey asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Alan replied, though he wasn't sure that was true. For the first time in his career, he felt genuinely uncertain about his ability to handle the bull he had drawn. Widowmaker wasn't just another rank bull. He was a force of nature that had embarrassed some of the best riders in the sport. The arena announcer's voice echoed through the building, introducing the evening's sponsors and building excitement for the competition ahead. In 30 minutes, the chutes would open and the bull riding would begin. Alan would be the 14th rider of the evening, giving him time to watch other rides and get a feel for how the bulls were performing. "Let's go watch some wrecks," Casey said with the gallows humor that was common among bull riders. They made their way to the chutes, where other riders were already gathering to watch the early competition. From behind the chutes, Alan could see the arena filling with spectators. The crowd for a PBR Touring Pro event was smaller than what he had experienced during his brief time on the premier circuit, but it was still substantial. Nearly 3,000 people who had paid to watch cowboys risk their lives for 8 seconds at a time. The first rider of the evening was a 19-year-old from Arizona named Jake Morrison. He had drawn a bull called Road Rage, a spotted animal known for his spinning style. Morrison climbed over the rails of chute number 1 with the easy confidence of youth, settling onto Road Rage's back as the crew helped him adjust his rope. "Rider ready," called the chute boss. Morrison nodded, and the gate swung open. Road Rage exploded from the chute in a series of tight spins to the left, his body contorting as he tried to dislodge his rider. Morrison stayed centered and balanced, his free arm pumping in rhythm with the bull's motion. At 6 seconds, Road Rage changed direction, spinning back to the right. Morrison adjusted smoothly, maintaining his position as the 8-second horn sounded. The crowd erupted as Morrison jumped safely to the ground, pumping his fist in celebration. The judges awarded him a score of 84 points, a solid ride that would be hard to beat in the early going. "Kid's got talent," Alan observed. "Yeah, but wait until he draws a bull like yours," Casey replied. "That's when we'll see what he's really made of." The second rider wasn't as fortunate. Tyler Webb, the lanky kid from Oklahoma, lasted only 4 seconds on a bull called Terminator before getting launched into the arena dirt. He got up slowly, favoring his left wrist, but walked out of the arena under his own power. Alan watched each ride carefully, noting how the bulls were performing and how the arena dirt was playing. The footing looked good. Not too deep, not too hard. The kind of conditions that favored riders who could stay balanced and in control. By the time the 13th rider finished his attempt, Alan's stomach was tight with nervous energy. Miguel Santos had managed a 79-point ride on Devil's Backbone, while Bobby Hutchins had been bucked off Tornado Alley in spectacular fashion, flying 15 feet before landing hard on his back. "Alan Rowe, you're up," called the chute boss. Alan made his way to chute number 4, where Widowmaker was already loaded and waiting. Up close, the bull seemed even larger than he had from the pen. His black hide glistened under the arena lights, and his breathing was steady and controlled. He stood perfectly still, as if he were saving his energy for the battle ahead. The chute crew helped Alan position his rope around Widowmaker's chest, just behind the bull's front legs. The rope was the only thing connecting rider to bull, a loop of braided grass that Alan would grip with his riding hand. There were no stirrups, no saddle, no reins. Just 8 feet of rope and whatever balance and instinct Alan could muster. "How's that feel?" asked the chute boss as Alan worked his hand into the rope handle. "Good," Alan replied, though his mouth had gone dry. He could feel Widowmaker's massive shoulders between his legs, could sense the coiled power waiting to explode from the chute. Alan looked out into the crowd, searching Section 12 until he found Linda. She was sitting in row 5 as promised, wearing her red shirt and watching intently. When their eyes met across the arena, she nodded once, a gesture of faith and love that steadied Alan's nerves. "Rider ready," the chute boss called. Alan took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that preceded every ride. This was the moment he lived for. The instant when all the preparation and worry fell away, leaving only him and the bull in 8 seconds of pure chaos. "Ready," Alan said. The gate swung open, and Widowmaker exploded from chute number 4 like a black thunderbolt. Alan felt the bull's massive shoulders bunch and release beneath him as they burst into the arena, the crowd's roar fading to a distant hum as his world narrowed to the bucking animal between his legs. Widowmaker came out spinning hard to the left, just as Alan had expected from watching the video. The bull's front end dropped low while his hindquarters kicked skyward, creating the rolling motion that had unseated so many riders before. Alan shifted his weight to stay centered, his free arm extended for balance as he fought to match Widowmaker's rhythm. At 3 seconds, the bull suddenly planted his front feet and launched himself straight up, his back legs kicking at the arena lights 15 feet above the ground. Alan felt himself sliding backward, his grip on the rope stretching as Widowmaker's power threatened to tear him loose. He squeezed his legs tighter and pulled himself forward, regaining his position just as the bull landed with bone-jarring force. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. Alan was still aboard, still in control, but he could feel Widowmaker gathering himself for something different. The bull's breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more deliberate. In his peripheral vision, Alan caught a glimpse of the chute where he had started. They were moving in a wide circle around the arena, Widowmaker's spins carrying them inexorably toward the metal gates and concrete walls that surrounded the riding area. At 6 seconds, Widowmaker made his move. Instead of continuing his spin to the left, the bull suddenly reversed direction with a violence that defied physics. Alan felt his body whip sideways as Widowmaker spun right, the centrifugal force threatening to tear his hand from the rope. His free arm flailed wildly as he fought to regain his balance, but the bull's change of direction had been too sudden, too perfect. 7 seconds. Alan was still on, but barely. His position had deteriorated badly. He was sitting too far forward, his weight shifted over Widowmaker's powerful shoulders. The bull seemed to sense his rider's vulnerability and responded with another explosive buck, this one aimed directly at the chute gates. The 8-second horn sounded just as Widowmaker slammed into the metal gate with tremendous force. Alan felt the impact through every bone in his body as the bull's shoulder collided with the steel rails. The rope slipped from his hand as the force of the collision launched him sideways, his body spinning through the air like a broken doll. Time seemed to slow as Alan flew toward the chute gate. He had enough presence of mind to try to protect himself, tucking his chin and bringing his arms up to shield his head. But there was nowhere to go, no way to avoid the inevitable collision with the unforgiving metal. Alan hit the gate at shoulder height, his right side taking the full impact of the collision. He heard his ribs crack like dry kindling, felt the sharp pain as broken bone fragments tore through muscle and tissue. The force of the impact folded him around the top rail of the gate before gravity took hold and pulled him down into the chute area. He landed hard on the concrete floor behind the chutes, his body crumpled against the base of the metal structure. Pain exploded through his chest as the broken ribs shifted, one jagged edge finding his right lung and puncturing the delicate tissue. Alan tried to breathe and found that he couldn't. Each attempt to draw air resulted in a bubbling, wet sound that terrified him more than the pain. "Rider down! Rider down!" The shout came from somewhere above him, but it sounded distant and muffled. Alan's vision was beginning to gray around the edges, and he could taste blood in his mouth. He tried to speak, to call for help, but only managed a weak gurgling sound. The arena's medical team reached him within seconds, but to Alan it felt like hours. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the tour physician, dropped to her knees beside him and immediately began her assessment. She could see the unnatural rise and fall of his chest, could hear the distinctive sound of a collapsed lung. "Don't try to talk," Dr. Walsh said, her voice calm but urgent. "We're going to take care of you." Alan's eyes found hers, and she could see the fear and confusion there. In 15 years of providing medical care at rodeo events, she had seen this look before. The moment when a rider realizes that something is seriously wrong, that this isn't just another routine injury that could be walked off or taped up. Pneumothorax, probable multiple rib fractures. Dr. Walsh called to her assistant as they worked to stabilize Alan. "Get the trauma unit on the line and tell them we're coming in hot." The crowd had fallen silent as word spread that something serious had happened. Linda Rowe had been watching from Section 12 when she saw Alan hit the gate, had seen the way his body crumpled, and didn't get back up. She was already running toward the chutes, pushing through security personnel who tried to stop her. "That's my husband," Linda shouted. "I need to see my husband." Casey Thompson had been standing behind the chutes when the accident happened, had seen the whole thing unfold in horrible slow motion. He found Linda in the corridor and grabbed her arm gently. "Linda, they're working on him right now," Casey said. "The doc's with him. He's getting the best care possible." "How bad is it?" Linda asked, her face pale with fear. Casey didn't answer immediately. He had seen the way Alan had hit the gate, had heard the sounds he made when he tried to breathe. In 24 years of life, most of it spent around rodeo, Casey had learned to recognize when someone was hurt badly. "I don't know," Casey said finally. "But they're taking good care of him." In the chute area, Dr. Walsh and her team were preparing to move Alan to the ambulance. His breathing had become increasingly labored, and his lips were taking on a bluish tint that indicated inadequate oxygen circulation. She had inserted a needle into his chest to relieve the pressure from the collapsed lung, but it was a temporary measure at best. "On 3, Dr. Walsh said as her team prepared to lift Alan onto the stretcher. 1, 2, 3. The movement caused Alan to cry out in pain, the first sound he had made since hitting the gate. The broken ribs grated against each other as they transferred him, and Dr. Walsh could see fresh blood frothing at the corners of his mouth. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, Alan caught a glimpse of the arena where he had spent so much of his life. The lights seemed too bright, the sounds too loud. Widowmaker was being herded back toward the holding pens, the bull apparently uninjured by his collision with the gate. The next rider was already climbing over the chute rails, ready to take his turn. Linda was allowed to ride in the ambulance, holding Alan's hand as the vehicle raced through the streets of Billings toward St. Vincent Healthcare. The paramedic, a young man named Tony Martinez, worked steadily to monitor Alan's vital signs and maintain his airway. "How long have you been married?" Tony asked Linda, partly to assess Alan's medical history and partly to keep her calm during the ride. 20 years next month," Linda replied, her eyes never leaving Alan's face. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that frightened her, and his breathing remained shallow and labored despite the oxygen mask. "Any medical conditions we should know about? Allergies to medications?" "He's allergic to penicillin," Linda said. "And he had surgery on his left knee about 10 years ago. But Alan's never been seriously hurt before. A few broken bones, some concussions, but nothing like this." Tony nodded, making notes on his clipboard while monitoring the equipment that tracked Alan's heart rate and blood pressure. The numbers weren't good. Alan's blood pressure was dropping, and his heart rate was elevated. Signs that his body was going into shock from the internal injuries. "How much farther?" Linda asked. 2 minutes, Tony replied. "The trauma team is waiting for us." At St. Vincent Healthcare, the emergency department had been alerted to expect a critical trauma patient. Dr. Michael Chun, the attending physician, had assembled a team that included a thoracic surgeon, an anesthesiologist, and 2 trauma nurses. They were ready when the ambulance arrived. Alan was conscious but fading as they wheeled him into the trauma bay. The bright lights and urgent voices around him seemed to fade in and out like a radio with poor reception. He tried to focus on Linda's voice, on the feeling of her hand holding his, but the pain in his chest was becoming overwhelming. "Let's get him on the monitors," Dr. Chin called as the team went to work. "I need a chest X-ray CBC, type and cross-match for 6 units, and get me a thoracic surgeon down here now." The X-ray confirmed what Dr. Chin had suspected. Alan had suffered multiple rib fractures on his right side, with at least 1 broken rib puncturing his lung. There was also evidence of internal bleeding, possibly from a lacerated liver or spleen. "We need to get him to surgery immediately," Dr. Chen told Linda as she waited in the hallway outside the trauma bay. "The lung injury is serious, and we're concerned about internal bleeding." Linda felt her legs go weak. "Is he going to be okay?" Dr. Chen's expression was grave. "Mrs. Rowe, your husband has suffered very serious injuries. We're going to do everything we can for him, but the next few hours are critical." As they wheeled Alan toward the operating room, he managed to squeeze Linda's hand weakly. She leaned down close to his ear, her tears falling on his face. "I love you," Linda whispered. "Fight, Alan. Sarah and I need you to fight." Alan tried to respond, but the anesthesia was already taking effect as they prepared him for emergency surgery. His last conscious thought was of Sarah, wondering if he would ever see her graduate, walk her down the aisle, or hold his grandchildren. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the thoracic surgeon, worked meticulously to repair the damage to Alan's lung and chest cavity. She found that 3 ribs had been broken, with one fragment causing a large tear in the right lung. There was also significant internal bleeding from a lacerated spleen, which required additional surgical intervention. Linda waited in the surgical waiting room, joined by Sarah, who had left her volleyball game early, when Casey called with news of the accident. Mother and daughter sat together in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, holding hands and watching the clock on the wall move with agonizing slowness. "Dad's tough," Sarah said, trying to comfort her mother as much as herself. "Remember when he got stepped on by that bull in Denver? Everyone thought he was done for, but he was back riding 2 months later." Linda nodded, but she knew this was different. She had seen the look in Dr. Chen's eyes, had heard the carefully measured tone in his voice. This wasn't a broken bone or a concussion that could be healed with time and physical therapy. This was life-threatening trauma that would challenge every resource of modern medicine. At midnight, Dr. Martinez finally emerged from the operating room, still wearing her surgical scrubs. Her expression was serious as she approached Linda and Sarah. "The surgery went as well as we could have hoped," Dr. Martinez said. "We were able to repair the lung injury and stop the internal bleeding. But Mrs. Rowe, your husband's injuries are very serious. He's lost a significant amount of blood, and his body has been through tremendous trauma. When can we see him?" Sarah asked. "He's being moved to the intensive care unit now. You can see him briefly, but he's still under sedation and on a ventilator to help him breathe." Linda and Sarah followed Dr. Martinez through the hospital corridors to the ICU, where Alan lay surrounded by machines and monitors. Tubes and wires connected him to devices that tracked his vital signs and assisted his breathing. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room. "The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical," Dr. Martinez explained. "His body needs time to recover from the surgery and begin healing. We're monitoring him closely for any signs of complications." Linda took Alan's hand, careful not to disturb the 4 lines and monitoring equipment. His skin felt cold and clammy, and his usually strong grip was completely limp. She had never seen him look so vulnerable, so completely at the mercy of forces beyond his control. "Can he hear us?" Linda asked. "It's possible," Dr. Martinez replied. "Many patients report awareness of voices and conversations during their recovery. Talking to him might help." Linda leaned close to Alan's ear, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're here, honey. Sarah and I are right here with you. You're going to be okay. The doctors fixed you up, and now you just need to rest and get better." Sarah stood on the other side of the bed, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her father. The man who had always seemed invincible, who had climbed onto the backs of the most dangerous animals in the world without hesitation, now looked small and fragile beneath the hospital sheets. "I'm sorry I gave you a hard time about quitting," Sarah whispered to her unconscious father. "I just wanted you to be safe. But I understand now why you couldn't stop. This is who you are." The next morning brought no improvement in Alan's condition. His vital signs remained stable but weak, and he showed no signs of regaining consciousness. Dr. Chen explained that Alan's body was focusing all its energy on healing the internal injuries, and that extended unconsciousness was not unusual in cases of severe trauma. Word of Alan's accident had spread throughout the bull riding community, and the hospital waiting room filled with cowboys who had driven through the night to be there. Casey Thompson had organized a phone tree to notify riders across the circuit, and messages of support were pouring in from around the country. "Alan's one of the good ones," Bobby Hutchins told Linda as he sat beside her in the waiting room. Been riding bulls longer than most of us have been alive, and he's always been there to help younger riders learn the ropes. Miguel Santos nodded in agreement. When I was starting out, Alan took me under his wing. Showed me how to read bulls, how to adjust my technique. I wouldn't be where I am today without his help. The stories continued throughout the day. Tales of Alan's generosity, his mentorship of younger riders, and his unwavering dedication to the sport. Linda realized that her husband had touched more lives than she had known, that his influence extended far beyond his family to an entire community of cowboys who considered him a friend and role model. As evening approached, Dr. Martinez returned with an update. "Mrs. Rowe, I need to speak with you about your husband's condition." Linda's heart sank at the serious tone in the doctor's voice. "What is it?" Alan's injuries were more severe than we initially realized. The trauma to his chest and the blood loss have put tremendous stress on his heart and other organs. We're doing everything possible, but his condition has deteriorated since yesterday. "What are you saying?" Linda asked, though she already feared the answer. "I'm saying that despite our best efforts, Alan's body may not be able to recover from the trauma. His heart is struggling, his kidneys are showing signs of failure, and he's developed complications from the lung injury." Linda felt the world spinning around her. "How long does he have?" Dr. Martinez hesitated. "It's difficult to say. Hours, possibly days. But Mrs. Rowe, I think you should prepare for the possibility that Alan may not survive this." Linda walked back to the ICU in a daze, Sarah beside her crying quietly. The machines around Alan's bed continued their steady rhythm, but Linda could see that his color had worsened. His breathing was increasingly labored despite the ventilator, and his skin had taken on a waxy appearance. She sat beside his bed and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Alan, honey, can you hear me? The doctors say you're having a hard time, but I need you to keep fighting. Sarah needs her father, and I need my husband." For a moment, Linda thought she felt Alan's fingers twitch in response. She leaned closer, watching his face intently for any sign of consciousness. His eyelids fluttered slightly, and his lips seemed to move as if he were trying to speak. "What is it, honey?" Linda whispered. "What are you trying to say?" But there was no further response. Alan's breathing became increasingly shallow as the night wore on, and by sunrise it was clear that his body was losing the fight. Dr. Martinez called Linda and Sarah to his bedside as his vital signs began to fail. "It's time," Dr. Martinez said gently. Linda held Alan's hand as his breathing gradually slowed and then stopped altogether. The monitors around his bed fell silent one by one as Dr. Martinez turned them off. At 6:47 a.m. on October 15th, 42-year-old Alan Rowe was pronounced dead from complications related to injuries sustained in a bull riding accident. Linda collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of her loss hit her. The man who had been the center of her world for 20 years was gone, taken by the sport that had defined his life and ultimately claimed it. In the corridor outside, word spread quickly among the assembled cowboys. Grown men who had faced down the most dangerous bulls in the world broke down and cried openly for their fallen friend. Bull riding was a brotherhood forged by shared danger and mutual respect, and the loss of Alan Rowe left a hole that could never be filled. The news of Alan Rowe's death spread through the bull riding community like wildfire. By noon, every rider on the PBR circuit had heard about the accident, and condolences were pouring in from across the country. The Professional Bull Riders Organization issued a statement expressing their sorrow and announcing that the next event would be dedicated to Alan's memory. Linda and Sarah returned to their ranch outside Billings in a fog of grief and disbelief. The house felt impossibly empty without Alan's presence. His coffee cup still sat in the kitchen sink from Thursday morning. His reading glasses were folded on the nightstand beside a copy of Pro Bull Rider magazine, and his boots stood in the mudroom where he had left them before departing for what would be his final ride. The funeral arrangements were handled by Michael's Funeral Home, a family-owned business that had been serving the Billings community for 3 generations. Robert Michaels, the current owner, was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who understood the unique needs of families who had lost someone to rodeo accidents. Unfortunately, it was not his first experience with such a tragedy. "We'll take care of everything," Robert assured Linda as they sat in his office the morning after Alan's death. "I know how difficult this must be for you and Sarah." The funeral was scheduled for Monday afternoon at the First Baptist Church of Billings, a modest red brick building that could accommodate the large crowd expected to attend. Word had gotten out that Alan's service would be open to the public, and cowboys were already traveling from across the western states to pay their respects. Linda spent the weekend in a haze of preparation and sorrow. She selected Alan's burial outfit, his best black Wrangler jeans, a white dress shirt, his lucky belt buckle from the 2003 Cheyenne Frontier days, and his custom-made boots that had carried him through hundreds of rides. Sarah helped her mother write the obituary, struggling to capture in a few paragraphs the essence of a man who had lived so fully and died so young. Alan James Rowe, 42, of Billings, Montana, died Friday, October 15th, from injuries sustained in a bull riding accident at Metropark Arena. Born in Lubbock, Texas, Alan had been a professional bull rider for 23 years and was a beloved member of the PBR community. He is survived by his wife Linda and daughter Sarah, both of Billings, and his mother Betty Rowe of Amarillo, Texas. Alan was known for his generosity in mentoring young riders and his unwavering dedication to the sport he loved. Casey Thompson drove down from Wyoming for the funeral, bringing with him 3 other riders who had considered Alan a mentor and friend. They arrived in Billings Sunday evening and met with Linda at the ranch to share stories and offer whatever support they could provide. "I keep thinking about that last ride," Casey said as they sat around the kitchen table where Alan had wrapped his wrists just 4 days earlier. He made the 8-second horn. Technically, it was a successful ride. "What did the judges score it?" Sarah asked. 87 points, Casey replied. "Would have won the long round if..." His voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Linda smiled sadly. "He would have been proud of that score. Alan always said that if you were going to get hurt, you might as well get hurt on a good ride." The conversation turned to memories of Alan's career, his best rides, his worst wrecks, and the quiet acts of kindness that had endeared him to fellow competitors. Miguel Santos told the story of how Alan had loaned him entry fee money when Miguel was broke and struggling to make it on the circuit. Bobby Hutchins recalled how Alan had driven 8 hours to attend Bobby's wedding, even though he had his own competition the next day. "Your husband was the real deal," Bobby told Linda. "There are a lot of flashy riders who get the headlines, but Alan was what we call a cowboy's cowboy. He did things the right way, treated people with respect, and never complained when luck went against him." Monday morning dawned gray and cold, with a sharp wind blowing down from the Beartooth Mountains. Linda woke early and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the pasture where Alan's horse, Buck, was grazing peacefully. The buckskin gelding had been Alan's companion for 12 years, and Linda wondered if the horse understood that his rider would never return. The funeral service was scheduled for 2 o'clock, but by noon the church parking lot was already filling with pickup trucks and horse trailers. Cowboys had driven through the night from as far away as Texas and Oklahoma to attend. Many wore their best Western attire, pressed jeans, dress shirts, and the good boots they saved for special occasions. Linda and Sarah arrived at the church at 1:30, accompanied by Casey and the other riders who had volunteered to serve as pallbearers. Linda wore a simple black dress and the silver necklace that Alan had given her for their 10th anniversary. Sarah was dressed in black slacks and a blue blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in the same ponytail she had worn to Alan's last volleyball game. The sanctuary was packed beyond capacity, with additional chairs set up in the fellowship hall for the overflow crowd. Linda was amazed to see the diversity of people who had come to honor Alan's memory. Not just cowboys and rodeo people, but also neighbors from their rural community, teachers from Sarah's school, and customers from the feed store where Alan had bought supplies for their small ranch. Pastor Jim Martinez, a third-generation Montanan who had ministered to the ranching community for 25 years, conducted the service. He had known Alan personally and spoke about his character, his love for his family, and his acceptance of the risks that came with his chosen profession. Alan Rowe knew that bull riding was dangerous, Pastor Martinez said in his eulogy. Every time he climbed over those chute rails, he was aware that he might not come home. But he also knew that living means taking risks, pursuing your passion, and staying true to who you are. Alan lived more in his 42 years than many people live in twice that time. Casey Thompson spoke on behalf of the bull riding community, his voice breaking as he described Alan's mentorship and friendship. "Alan taught me that being a cowboy isn't about how tough you are or how many buckles you win. It's about character, integrity, and helping others along the way. He was the kind of man we all hoped to become." Sarah surprised everyone by asking to speak at her father's funeral. She walked to the podium with the same quiet confidence that had characterized Alan, and spoke without notes about the father she had both worried about and admired. "Dad knew that we were scared every time he rode," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her tears. But he also knew that giving up something you love because it's dangerous isn't really living. Dad lived every day to the fullest, and he died doing what he loved. I'm going to miss him terribly, but I'm proud to be his daughter. The service concluded with a recording of Mama Tried by Merle Haggard, Alan's favorite song. As the music played, Linda looked around the crowded sanctuary and realized that Alan's legacy extended far beyond his family. He had touched hundreds of lives through his kindness, his example, and his willingness to help others pursue their dreams. The burial took place at Sunset Memorial Gardens, a cemetery on the western edge of Billings with a view of the mountains that Alan had loved. The graveside service was attended by a smaller group of family and close friends, but even this gathering numbered more than 100 people. As the casket was lowered into the ground, the assembled cowboys performed a final tribute. Each rider removed his hat and placed it over his heart as taps was played by a bugler from the Montana National Guard. It was a simple gesture, but one that conveyed the respect and affection that Alan had earned during his 23-year career. After the burial, friends and family gathered at the ranch for a meal and continued sharing of memories. Linda had worried about having enough food, but the community had rallied around her and Sarah, bringing enough casseroles, salads, and desserts to feed an army. It was a testament to the caring nature of rural Montana, where neighbors still looked after one another in times of need. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation naturally turned to Alan's future plans and what his death meant for Linda and Sarah. Alan had carried a modest life insurance policy through his union, but it would not be enough to sustain the ranch without his income from competition and seasonal work. I want you to know that there's a place for you at the store anytime you want it, Tom Henderson told Linda. Tom owned the feed and ranch supply store where Alan had worked part-time during the winter months. Alan was good help, and I know you've got the same work ethic. Linda appreciated the offer, but she wasn't ready to think about the practical concerns of life without Alan. Right now, she was focused on getting through each day and helping Sarah cope with the loss of her father. As evening approached, the gathering gradually dispersed. Casey was among the last to leave, and he pulled Linda aside for a private conversation. I want you to know that Alan talked about you and Sarah all the time, Casey said. Every conversation we had, every mile we drove together, he was always talking about how proud he was of his family. You meant everything to him. Thank you, Casey. That means a lot. There's something else, Casey continued. Alan won prize money from his last ride. $850 for finishing second in the long round. It's not much, but it's yours. Linda felt tears welling up again. Even in death, Alan was still trying to provide for his family. In the days following the funeral, Linda and Sarah began the difficult process of adjusting to life without Alan. The ranch felt enormous and empty without his presence, and simple tasks like feeding the horses and checking the fences seemed overwhelming without his help. Sarah threw herself into her schoolwork and volleyball, finding solace in routine and the support of her teammates and teachers. Her grades, which had slipped in the week following her father's death, gradually improved as she learned to channel her grief into determination to succeed. Linda struggled more with the adjustment. She had been married to Alan for 20 years, and her identity was deeply intertwined with being his wife and the mother of his daughter. Now she had to figure out who she was as a widow and single mother. 3 weeks after the funeral, Linda received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the PBR tour physician who had treated Alan after his accident, knocked on the front door of the ranch house on a cold November afternoon. Mrs. Rowe, I hope you don't mind me stopping by, Dr. Walsh said. I was in Billings for another event, and I wanted to check on you and Sarah. Linda invited Dr. Walsh in for coffee, grateful for the company and the chance to talk with someone who had been present during Alan's final moments in the arena. I want you to know that Alan didn't suffer, Dr. Walsh said as they sat in the living room. The impact knocked him unconscious almost immediately. He wasn't aware of the pain or the severity of his injuries. Thank you for telling me that, Linda replied. I've been wondering about those last few moments. Dr. Walsh studied Linda carefully. How are you holding up? Really? Linda sighed. Some days are better than others. I keep expecting him to walk through the door, to hear his truck in the driveway. The quiet is the hardest part. Alan was always talking, always making plans or telling stories. Grief is a process, Dr. Walsh said gently. There's no right way to do it and there's no timeline. Some days will be harder than others, but gradually the good memories will outweigh the pain. They talked for an hour about Alan, about bull riding, and about the future. Dr. Walsh had been providing medical care at rodeo events for 15 years, and she had seen too many families devastated by accidents. But she had also seen the remarkable resilience of the rodeo community, the way people rallied around those who were hurting. "Have you thought about attending any rodeo events?" Dr. Walsh asked. "I know it might seem painful, but sometimes being around the community that was such a big part of Alan's life can be healing." Linda hadn't considered it. The thought of watching other riders risk their lives in the same arena where Alan had died seemed unbearable. But she also missed the community, the friendships, and the sense of belonging that had come with being part of the rodeo world. A month later, Linda made the decision to attend the PBR event in Denver, the same competition where Alan had planned to compete after Billings. Casey had offered to drive her and Sarah down for the weekend, and after much consideration, Linda accepted. Walking into the Pepsi Center in Denver, Linda was overwhelmed by the familiar sights and sounds of professional bull riding. The smell of livestock and leather, the sound of bulls snorting in their pens, and the excited chatter of fans all brought back powerful memories of her years following Alan around the circuit. But she was also amazed by the reception she received. Cowboys she barely knew approached her to offer condolences and share stories about Alan. Fans who recognized her from her years in the stands expressed their sympathy and told her how much they had respected her husband. "Your husband was one of the good ones," said an elderly man wearing a Resistal hat and pearl-snap shirt. "I've been coming to these events for 30 years, and I always enjoyed watching Alan ride. He had class, you know. Win or lose, he carried himself like a gentleman." The tribute to Alan before the evening's competition was emotional and fitting. His photograph was displayed on the arena's video screen while the announcer read a summary of his career accomplishments. The crowd of 15,000 rose for a moment of silence, and Linda felt a warm sense of pride knowing that her husband was being honored in this way. But the most meaningful moment came when Casey Thompson won the event, his first victory of the season. As he accepted the championship buckle, Casey held it up to the crowd and pointed toward the section where Linda and Sarah were sitting. "This one's for Alan Rowe," Casey shouted into the microphone, his voice echoing throughout the arena. The crowd erupted in applause, and Linda felt tears streaming down her face. It was a gesture of respect and remembrance that perfectly captured the bond between bull riders, the way they supported each other through triumph and tragedy. On the drive back to Montana, Sarah asked her mother a question that had been on her mind since the funeral. "Mom, do you think Dad regretted anything? About his career, I mean." Linda considered the question carefully. "Your father lived his life exactly the way he wanted to. He knew the risks, but he also knew the rewards. The friendships, the excitement, the sense of purpose, those things meant everything to him. But what about us? Did he ever regret the time away from home, the missed games and events?" "Of course he did," Linda replied. "Your father struggled with that balance every day. But he also knew that being true to himself made him a better husband and father. If he had given up bull riding for us, he would have been miserable, and that would have affected our family too." As they drove through the darkness across Wyoming and into Montana, Linda reflected on the 20 years she had spent as a bull rider's wife. It had been a life filled with fear, excitement, pride, and constant uncertainty. But it had also been a life filled with love, adventure, and a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. The months that followed brought gradual healing and adjustment. Linda took a job at Tom Henderson's feed store, finding satisfaction in work that connected her to the ranching community she had grown to love. Sarah continued to excel in school and volleyball, her determination fueled by a desire to make her father proud. In the spring, Linda made a decision that surprised many people in the community. She announced that she would sponsor a scholarship fund in Alan's name, providing financial assistance to young bull riders who were trying to make it on the professional circuit. "Alan always believed in helping young riders," Linda explained to the local newspaper. "He knew how difficult it was to succeed in this sport without financial support. This scholarship will ensure that his legacy of mentorship continues." The Alan Rowe Memorial Scholarship became an annual tradition at the Metropark Rodeo, with funds raised through a special event that combined bull riding competition with a barbecue dinner and auction. Linda and Sarah attended every year, presenting the scholarship check to a deserving young rider and sharing stories about Alan's career and character. 5 years after Alan's death, Casey Thompson visited the ranch to tell Linda about his decision to retire from bull riding. At 29, he was still competitive, but a series of injuries and the desire to start a family had convinced him that it was time to move on. "I keep thinking about what Alan would say," Casey told Linda as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. He always talked about knowing when it was time to hang up your spurs. Alan would say that you've given everything you had to the sport, Linda replied. He'd be proud of your career and your decision to leave on your own terms. Casey nodded. I've been thinking about starting a bull riding school, maybe training young riders and teaching them about safety and technique. Alan always said that experience was the best teacher, but it doesn't have to come at the cost of broken bones. Linda smiled. That sounds like something Alan would have supported wholeheartedly. As Casey prepared to leave, he handed Linda a small wooden box. I've been carrying this around for 5 years, and I think it's time you had it back. Inside the box was Alan's wedding ring, the simple gold band that he had removed before every ride to prevent injury to his finger. The medical team had given it to Casey after the accident, and he had kept it safe ever since. Linda slipped the ring onto her thumb, where it fit perfectly. Thank you for keeping it safe. Thank you for sharing him with all of us, Casey replied. That evening, Linda and Sarah drove to the cemetery where Alan was buried. His headstone was simple black granite with his name, dates, and a small engraving of a bull rider. Below that were the words Linda had chosen. He lived 8 seconds at a time. I've been thinking about college, Sarah said as they stood beside the grave. I want to study business and maybe help run the scholarship fund full-time. Your father would love that, Linda said. He always believed that education was the key to making something of yourself. As they drove home through the gathering darkness, Linda reflected on how much her life had changed since that October night when Alan made his last ride. The pain of losing him would never completely go away, but it had been tempered by the realization that his influence continued to ripple through the lives of everyone he had touched. Alan Rowe had died doing what he loved, in front of people who respected him, while pursuing the dream that had defined his adult life. In a sport where careers often ended in frustration and failure, his had ended with dignity and honor. He had made the 8-second horn on his final ride, winning the round and proving one last time that he belonged in the arena with the best riders in the world. The bull that killed him, Widowmaker, continued to compete for several more years before being retired to a breeding program. He never seriously injured another rider, leading some to speculate that the collision with the gate had been a freak accident rather than an intentional act of aggression. In the end, it didn't matter. Bull riding was inherently dangerous, and both riders and bulls were participants in a dance that could turn deadly in an instant. Linda never remarried, finding fulfillment in her work, her daughter, and her role as keeper of Alan's memory. She continued to attend rodeo events occasionally, always sitting in Section 12, Row 5, wearing something red. The cowboys knew who she was and what she represented, the price that families paid for the dreams pursued in the arena. Sarah graduated from high school as valedictorian and earned a business degree from Montana State University. She took over management of the scholarship fund and expanded it to include assistance for riders who suffered career-ending injuries. Her father's influence was evident in her compassion for others and her understanding of the bull riding community's unique challenges. On the 10th anniversary of Alan's death, the PBR held a special ceremony in his honor at the same arena where he had died. His name was added to the Ring of Honor, joining other riders who had made the ultimate sacrifice in pursuit of their dreams. Linda and Sarah were invited to participate in the ceremony, and as they stood in the center of the arena where Alan had spent his final moments, they felt his presence as strongly as if he were standing beside them. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena as he read Alan's accomplishments and described his character. But the words that meant the most to Linda were the simplest ones. Alan Rowe, cowboy, husband, father, and friend. He made his last ride in Billings, and it was a good one. As the crowd of 12,000 rose for a standing ovation, Linda looked up at the lights where Alan had looked during his final ride. She could almost see him there, hat in hand, smiling that crooked grin that had captured her heart 25 years earlier. Alan Rowe had lived the life he chose, loved the family he treasured, and died pursuing the dream that defined him. In a world where many people never find their true calling, he had spent 23 years doing exactly what he was meant to do. His legacy lived on in the young riders he had mentored, the family he had loved, and the community that continued to honor his memory every time they gathered to watch cowboys chase their dreams 8 seconds at a time. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.